And just like that, the Fox X-Men movies come to a close. Oh man. Dark Phoenix, which is an X-Men movie, if you couldn't tell by the title, which for some odd reason you can't, because it doesn't say X-Men Dark Phoenix. So Dark Phoenix is the newest X-Men movie of the Fox X-Men movies, probably the last two, because now Disney owns Fox. Point is, as we saw from the trailer, while doing a space mission, Jean Grey absorbs basically the purple version of Parallax from the Green Lantern movie, and now Jean Grey has the Phoenix Force, something I guess she didn't have before when she absolutely positively had it in X-Men Apocalypse. Whatever. Now she is the Dark Phoenix. And since this is the final send-off for the Fox X-Men movies, and X-Men 3 The Last Stand, which had Dark Phoenix in it, kind of, wasn't really the Dark Phoenix people wanted. People want to see some good Dark Phoenix X-Men shit. And this movie actually does have some garbage. This movie's not good. It's all over the place. Jean Grey gets the Phoenix Force. Some people are going after her to take her down. Some people are going after her to help her. Then there's this other faction, basically Jessica Chastain and friends. Can't really go into it because the trailer didn't really go into it, but they're also going after her. And I get why they're in here, because, you know, from the comic book. You don't know much about Jessica Chastain and friends because the movie doesn't really inform you too much about them. So you don't really care much about them, so they just feel like they're in the way. I know how important they were supposed to be, but they're not in this movie. I'm just saying Jessica Chastain and friends didn't offer anything other than there's an action scene in the climax. And even then it takes place in a train, so how interesting is it really? It takes place in a series of boxcars. It's about as wide as, well, a series of boxcars. This is one of those times that this comic book movie, like every comic book movie that's ever happened, they had to have that moment where they're like, all right, what do we cut out? Because the movie, time, we have to make those calls, those tough calls. And they probably should have just cut them out. Or keep Jessica Chastain and friends and split this into two movies, which maybe they wanted to do that. But the fact that Disney bought Fox, they wouldn't be able to finish it, so this is what we have. This movie that just feels like it's crushed together, that really calls back to a time in comic book movie history where studios were like, we have comic book characters. We'll just have them do stuff. They don't have to do anything interesting. There doesn't even have to be a story. We can just have them do shit. That's what this movie feels like. It's just X-Men characters doing shit. And that's where I will say, man, I'm about to say this. X-Men The Last Stand at least had a plot driving the whole thing forward. There was a kid, they were harvesting a cure, and oh yeah, by the way, we have Dark Phoenix also. Not saying that's great, not saying that's how it should have been, not saying it works. I'm just saying it works more than this movie works. Fuck me. I just said that. And if you just look at the motivations, like Magneto, we've seen him. We've seen his arc before in the other X-Men movies. Magneto's laying low, trying to live the peaceful life. Series of events have brought him out of hiding, and now he's gonna join the action to do a couple things. That's Magneto in this movie. Some of the character choices with a couple of the characters, they conflict with the characters I personally know. Enter Jake Xavier and Jake McCoy. This was shown in the trailer, so I'll talk about it here. Xavier in this movie did the same thing he did in X-Men The Last Stand. Granted, X-Men The Last Stand, when Jean Grey was a little girl, I guess she had another personality and Xavier repressed it. That's actually less of a dick move than what he does in here. In here, Jean Grey just has a traumatizing experience, and Charles Xavier's like, I'll just block that out of your mind and suppress that. You can't help her overcome her trauma? You have to repress that shit? How qualified are you? Exactly what is it you do here? We're gonna pass our kids off to someone who can't really help kids? Instead, he just takes the easy route, like I'll just repress that there, so I don't actually have to work, because I'm actually really unqualified. I thought it was a dick call. It made Charles Xavier kind of a dick. Also, Jake Crawler. There's a scene where he's just massacring people with this evil look in his eyes. I was like, oh, Nightcrawler. Or Azazel. If you wanted Azazel in the movie, you could have just had him in the movie and been like, oh, he didn't die off screen. Granted, they were bad guys, but still, Nightcrawler is just straight up killing them. Like tail through the neck, transports one in front of a vehicle, just smashes into him. It either feels like Azazel or Nightcrawler from the beginning of X-Men 2 when he was like being controlled with the shit on his neck. The pacing sucks too. After Jean gets her Phoenix powers and she flies away, and there's just like all the X-Men are mopey. Jean's most of the time's like, oh, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, God. Then they're like, all right, we'll just start throwing characters at her, and then she'll have to deal with that, and she'll run off and be like, oh God, do I really want this? And then she flies away again, and they're all mopey again, and I'm like, something needs to happen. How interesting can that be? Yeah, they could have just had her be this big evil that they now have to take out, but that would have been X-Men Apocalypse. Would have been a little redundant. So you have the possibility of redundancy or boredom. What to do? Here's what the studio should have done. They should have realized, well, it's above the writers we have. Let's pay for better writers. That's it. That's how you do it. You accept the fact that you don't know what to do, and you hire the people who do know what to do. Or you realize Disney's gonna buy your ass, and who really gives a shit? We'll just throw garbage out there. Maybe that was smarter. They knew. They're like, why would we pay for better writers? No one's gonna watch this. Also, the special effects were ass. I can't even imagine what it would have looked like if this movie had come out when it was going to come out in 2018. All that time to refine it, didn't. You can just tell everyone just kind of, they were all over it. The actors were over it, the studio was over it, everyone wanted to be like, all right, you know what? X-Men's done. We're hanging it up. We're over it. It just felt like no one gave a shit anymore. I feel like this movie was just a big waste of time. And if they're wasting my time, I'm not going to let them waste your time. Just stay away from it. Let's go through it. This movie's not as good as the first X-Men movie. Not as good as X2, X-Men United. Not as good as X-Men 3 The Last Stand. Not as good as X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's not as good as X-Men First Class. It's not as good as X-Men Days of Future Past. It's not as good as X-Men Apocalypse. Certainly not as good as Logan. It's the worst X-Men movie. I would watch any one of those before I watch this again. Because at least those ones look like they were trying to tell a story. This looks like it was written and or directed by that guy. And then Dark Phoenix, the movie ends, and like the sound of a toilet flushing, you know, well, now that's over. It's the end of an event. In summing up this movie, as a great philosopher once eloquently and famously said,
"This is a mess."
And it is. This movie is truly a mess. Guys, this is dark, but Dark Phoenix is dog shit. Oh my god. I didn't even stay for the post-credit scene. There might have been a post-credit scene in here, but I didn't care. All right, so Dark Phoenix, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Or list your X-Men movies. Best to worst, worst to best, however you want to list them. And is this one on the bottom? Or am I just a dick? Whatever you think, comment below, let me know. And like I've said before, when you guys hit that like button, it really helps the video out, helps the channel out. So if you like this video, or you have a level of disdain for the shitty X-Men movies, or shitty comic book movies in general, or shitty movies in general, you hit that like button, that would really help me out and I would appreciate it. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.